Well, I usually have a slide up here with a bowl of matzo ball soup. It's because Devarim 8:10 says that we will eat and be satisfied and bless Adonai for the good land. So let's do that. Abba Father, we have eaten and we're satisfied, and we thank you for the land. In Yeshua's name. Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm glad you could make it. I guess it's Shavua Tov by now. Maybe the sun is down, but it's been a pretty good Shabbat. I was kind of tired, but feel refreshed now. So some of you might recall that we started at the beginning of this year going through the Ketuvim Netzarim of the New Testament. We're doing it in chronological order as best as possible. And so we're in the 20th Sabbath since Sukkot right now. So we just started the book of Galatians. And we made it through the Gospels. We made it through First Luke and Second Luke. I'm just joking. It's Acts.
We still only have Acts 15. So.
Yeah, right. We still got a little bit to go in Second Luke. And every week when I send out the email, I try to attach the scriptures that we're reading for that week. And like Wayne said earlier, we're only doing this for 1 year. And it's been interesting because, you do the Torah for so long, every week, every year, you kind of lose track of what's in the New Testament without actually taking a good hard look at it. One of the things that's interesting that I found for this week, starting this week, so when we started the Gospels and going through the book of Acts up to 15 or to 14, there's not much in the way of messianic interpretation or rabbinic interpretation in any of that stuff. So it's kind of a new look, and when you do look at it, you can truly see the Torah. You can truly see Yeshua in the Torah when we do that. But interesting about Galatians, there's a ton of it. Messianic. This seems like the book that messianic teachers decided to jump on. And there are tons of opinions and tons of teachings, and even some rabbinic stuff, like even modern day rabbis are taking a look at the book of Galatians, obviously so they can try to refute it in most cases, but there's lots of opinions about it out there. So this week, of course, we read the first 3 chapters of Galatians, and so this is what we're going to go through this week. When I ask the question, does Galatia equate to Galut Yah, or exiles of Yah? Abbreviated history of the Galatians. We'll go verse by verse through chapter 1. Talk about the topic, another gospel, that we heard Paul talking about tonight, verse by verse in chapter 2. And then we're going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and Galatians. Some pretty interesting stuff there. So, getting started, several Messianic teachers have opined, and I'm sure you've heard it, that Galatia, or Galut Yah, means exiles of Yah, because the word Galut means exiles, right? But let's take a look. And they even make a pretty cool case, and I heard it early on. I'm going to say I probably first heard about it around 2005, maybe 2006, and even some of our own people at the time were teaching that that's what it was. And because, Yeshua says he only came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and so the Galatians, being mostly Gentiles, so to speak, that was them, and it was Galut Yah. And even to say that... Jews know about it too, because even, like the writers of cartoons, think about Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam, he called him a big galoot. And of course, a rabbit is an uncoaster animal, so he's calling him a big galoot, which he's calling him basically a goy, so to speak. And I heard that back in the day. But let's take a look at it. Two good examples of galut we'll find in Jeremiah and in Ezekiel, so we'll take a look at those. So we want to know if the two words, these two are etymologically related, right? Galut and golah are the two Hebrew words that mean exile. Can everybody see those up there? Okay. And you can see the difference. The first one that you see there in the upper left is galut, ending with a tav, and then golah, ending with a hey, right? And it really means to exile, or no one is supposed to approach that person or uncover their nakedness, that kind of thing. You can see that from Leviticus chapter 18. And so we're taking a look at Jeremiah 52:31. the word there is truly galut, gimel lamed vav tav. You can see there the exile of, and then, but in Ezekiel 1:2, it's exactly the same word. So we can clearly see it though. So in the Targum though, we can see here, we see it again, legalut, right? This is from Targum Jonathan. You can see Ezekiel 1:2 has that same word spelled exactly the same way, galut, which means exile. So the Aramaic Targum and the Hebrew both show it exactly. Well, that's important because in the Aramaic Peshitta New Testament, the word Galatia is not spelled like that. So Aramaic New Peshitta spells it, you can see there, it's with a tet instead of a tav. So it's completely spelled different. You can see down at the bottom where it says galut with a tav, and then in the Aramaic Peshitta New Testament, it says pretty much Galatia or something like a galutia, but it's not spelled the same. It's not the same word. And so the T sound is the same. I mean, just two different letters, right? But it begs the question then, maybe the dialect changed, because that happens from time to time, right? So if we compare Galatia from Galatians to the Aramaic Peshitta in Matthew, you can see here with the tet, in Galatia is what it means. Then if we go to Matthew Aramaic, and you see in exiles in captivity, they still spell it, even in the Peshitta New Testament, with the tav and not the tet. And another one in captivity, another one from Matthew Chapter 1, and then another one. So you can see that it's still spelled captivity or exile. It's still spelled with the tav. It's not with the tet. So really the bottom line, to answer the question, are they related? No, they're not. And Galatia does not mean exiles of Yah. It's just the bottom line. And so being Bereans, you got to take a look at that. And sometimes you got to accept that the cool story isn't the real story. Because it would be really cool if it really did mean exiles of Yah. But the bottom line is it just doesn't. Any questions about this? Anybody got anything? Anybody studied it out before?
Never heard of this before.
Oh, really?
No, I've never heard this before.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Well, so then what does it mean, what does Galatia mean in Greek then? Because that was like a Greek.
It means it's a place.
Well, I mean, I know it's a place, but like, does it have a meaning?
I didn't look it up, but I probably should have. Did you? Do you know?
I don't remember, but it is
Something to do with Gaul.
Yeah, it is actually
Yeah.
separate. It's not a Greek term in the sense that the language of the dialect of the area has something to do more with, Central Europe.
The Celts.
The Celts of Central Europe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they migrated down there.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so who were the Galatians? Let's talk about that just a little bit. You can see here, Galatia is pretty much in modern-day Turkey. And I got a slow, I don't know if it's going to, yep, it did work. Got a slow circle going around where Galatia is.
That's an oval, actually.
Yeah, well, looks round to me, but I'm kind of blind. So. Yeah, I got a little oval around it. But if you want to take a look at it again, as part of the Roman Empire, you can see the countries surrounding it there. Sorry, I didn't have a more clear picture of that. So the territory in modern Turkey known as Galatia was originally home of ancient civilization of the Hittites. But it became occupied by the Gallic Celts in the 3rd century BCE, hence Galatia or Gallia of the East. So the Gauls migrated east and the south during the reign of Alexander the Great and in the late 4th century, but he held them off and pushed them back towards the Danube River. Around 280 BCE, the Gauls were on the move again, first settling in Thracia, then again into Macedonia and Greece. The Gauls stormed through Macedonia and Greece, sacking Delphi and causing a great deal of disorder before being stopped at the Dardanelles. King Nicomedes I of Bithynia invited these homeless Celts as mercenaries. Everybody's heard that story before, right? And they crossed the straits with upward of 20,000 people, including their women and children, helping establish Nicomedes the Gauls were awarded with living space on the Anatolian plateau. And so there they continue to live their tribal lifestyle, essentially established in 3 separate tribes. The central part of Galatia belonged to the tribe known as the Tectosages, who established a capital at Ancyra, which bears the name Ankara, Celtic for anchor. And in the west, Tolistaboli took up residence with their capital as Procinus in the east, and Trochmi established themselves at Tavium. And they were loosely organized per Celtic custom, but established a representative national council. As fierce warriors, they proved to be a constant source of trouble in the region, overrunning their former hosts in Bithynia and plundering all around them with little resistance until about 235 BCE. Roman contact with Galatia came during the Syrian War against Antiochus, as the Gauls became mercenary allies of the Syrian king. Rome launched a successful expedition in 189 BC, and Roman influence spread deeply into the east. Thereafter, the Galatians became Roman allies. With Pompey's victory, the Galatians were finally organized as a client state in 64 BCE, and that political situation remained in effect until after the victory of Octavian in the Second Civil War and his ascension as Augustus.
Caesar Augustus.
And so in 25 BCE, the third Galatian king, Amyntas, died, and Augustus formally incorporated Galatia into an official Roman province. And from that point on, Galatia remained a provincial backwater with little economic exploitation or political dissent of any kind. It's like they just bowed down and took it and said, yep, we're your faithful servant right here, right? And so Galatians remained loyal to that empire throughout its history. Contributing to this loyalty, the Celts were inundated with Hellenistic culture. And later the writers referred to the inhabitants as Gallo-Graeci. Celtic culture continued to flourish as well. However, the people were still known to speak a Celtic tongue, similar to that of the Gallic Treveri, who lived in the lower valley of the Moselle River, in what is now modern Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. As late as the 5th century CE, right? So there's kind of an abbreviation of who they are and how they got there. They're Celts, and they spoke a Celtic tongue. So Galatia is kind of the Gauls, right? Any questions about that?
It's interesting. The Celts were all over the place. I know that there's a big Celtic thing, further to the east. So Celts were there in modern day Russia, Ukraine, as well as in Central Europe.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And I think there's some in southeastern Comanche County. Just saying. That was sorry. Back to it. So there was once in this several slides on. There's a good possibility that Galatians was written in Aramaic. There's at least enough evidence to give good plausibility of that, and so I didn't include it here tonight. Please take a look at it yourself. You can see it, and it's all about how words are put together and how sentences are put together in Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. So I think there's good plausibility the book of Galatians was written in Aramaic originally. We don't have a copy of that right now, but I bet you there's one probably in the Vatican. I'm a conspiracy theorist about that.
Well, I mean, there's Peshitta.
Yeah, there is the Peshitta, right?
Is that a conspiracy?
So let's go Galatians Chapter 1. We'll kind of go a little bit. We'll read a verse, and we'll talk some key points about the verse kind of through there. So in this case, Paul, an apostle, not from men and not appointed by men, but Yeshua the Messiah and Elohim the Father, who raised him from the house of the dead. The key points here is Paul appears as Shaul throughout the book of Acts in Aramaic, but he uses Paulos in his letters. I don't know why. Anybody know why he did that? Because I don't, but it is the case he did. Paul's calling as a shliach. What does shliach mean? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or apostle. Sent one is what it really means, yeah. Shliach sho. Is not from men, but Yeshua and Elohim the Father. And it goes to point out that Yeshua is not the Father. Elohim the Father raised Yeshua the Messiah from the dead. Yeshua did not raise himself from the dead. You look like you got a question.
I'm just trying to see how to spell that.
What?
The word you said, shiach.
Shliach.
Shliach. Oh yeah, I can point it out to you really quick. Right there. Shliach.
Gotcha.
So the church that we're affiliated with here, the Impact Center, their leader, he goes by Apostle Ray or APG, and we always just call him Shliach Ray because he goes by Apostle. So that's what we do. I got to teach one time in their congregation on a Wednesday night. He says, "What do you keep calling me?" And I said, "Shliach." And he goes, "Oh, anyways." He's a really good guy. Oh, you met him earlier tonight down at the end of the hall. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really good guy. Yeah. Ray Garcia is his name. So keep on going. Verse 2, grace and peace to you from the Elohim and Father of our Master Yeshua, the Messiah. And so the word up here in Aramaic there, edah, in Aramaic corresponds to adah or adat, which is congregation or Hebrew, or assembly in Hebrew. And it's also used frequently to denote Israel in the Tanakh. So, and you can read that in Leviticus 9:5. And Greek uses ecclesia, of course, and also ecclesia is used for Israel in the Greek Septuagint. Paul speaks on behalf of both Elohim the Father and Maran, our Master, Yeshua the Messiah. Any questions here? Or comments? Verses 4 and 5 says, who gave his nefesh, or his soul self, so our sins that are delivered from this world that is evil according to the will of Elohim the Father. And then verse 5, to whom the glory be forever and ever. Amen. Yeshua exchanged his nefesh, which is, what does nefesh mean? Soul, yep, good. Nefesh is soul. How is for, okay, so here's a question. How is, when we typically read forever and ever, how is that typically said in Hebrew? Leolam Vaed. Yeah, very good. That's how. But interestingly, in this case, it's in Aramaic. It's rendered as Leolam pretty much twice, right? Pretty.
Well, it's pluralized the second time. Leolam.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
It gives it that forever.
Leolam Almin. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty cool. Amen. Really emphasizes it there. I like that. Verses 6 through 9, I am stunned into silence as if dead, that you have so quickly forgotten Messiah who has called you into his grace and gone to another gospel that is non-existent. But here there are men who agitated you and desired to pervert the gospel of Messiah. For if us, or even an angel of heaven, preach outside from what was preached to you, let them be cursed. As I said before, so I say again, whichever man preaches to you outside of what you have received, let him be accursed. So another gospel is we think is the subject of the entire letter. That they're getting something other than what was taught to them. There is not a separate gospel for Jews and another one for non-Jews. There's only one gospel of the Messiah. And interestingly, we're kind of thinking that the men who agitated you that he's talking about there maybe are the same ones from faction that made an argument about salvation in Acts chapter 15. Ordinarily, I'd say let's read Acts chapter 15, verses 1 through 31, but I think for the sake of time, you can read that on your own. But
that's about circumcision?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, good memory. That's good. Verses 10 through 12, do I persuade men or Elohim? Do I seek to please the sons of men? Because if so, I should not be a servant of Messiah. But I want you to realize, my brothers, that the gospel I preached to you was not from the sons of men, nor did I receive from the sons of men teaching in the revelation of Yeshua the Messiah. So Avi ben Mordecai has a pretty good, it'll be the next couple of slides. So Paul was given a unique view of the plan of Adonai regarding satisfaction of debt for both of houses of Israel, with the written Torah as their constitution, and not the oral Torah of men who wanted control of Israel's laws and customs, or the halachot, right? Got something to say about that? I mean, I guess it's pretty self-explanatory there. Putting oneself under the law, requiring one to put another under the law, of reforms and controls of the Pharisaic rabbinic system of law plays into the definition of high-handed rebellion against the Almighty. It's clear that no one has the authority to nullify the written Torah under any circumstances. Paul and Yeshua both understood that. I think what we're saying here is a lot of times the oral Torah seems to somehow outweigh what is actually written in Torah. That's not to say that the oral Torah isn't a good source of history and to try to know how to do things. For example, the Bible says when you're going to slaughter animals, you'll do it the way I told you to do it. But the Torah doesn't tell us how to do it. But we do read how to do it in the oral Torah or those things that were written down much later. So you don't want to just necessarily throw those things out. The Torah tells us that at least men are supposed to wear tzitzits on the corners of their garments. But it doesn't say men, but it doesn't tell you what to do with them or how to make them, but the oral Torah does, right? So you don't want to throw it away, but you also want to make sure that what you're learning from it aligns with the Torah completely. And if it doesn't, you might want to not pay attention to it. Because right here, Paul even says that no one has the authority to nullify the written Torah under any circumstances. And just above that, Avi points out that it plays the definition of high-handed rebellion against the Almighty and distorts the true gospel. And these people just basically want control, right? Continuing on, recall the words of Yeshua in Matthew chapter 15, which concerns creating innovative laws or takanot to supersede the law of the written commandments. Every plant which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into a pit. I like that. Avi has some pretty cool insights. I don't like all of them, but he's got some pretty cool insights. I'll tell you that. Got anything?
Well, it kind of begs the question of who are Paul's opponents, and so there, as we'll talk about a little later, there's more than one view of who those opponents are.
Sure. 13 to 16 says, "You have heard then regarding my previous conduct in Judaism, especially how I followed the congregation of Elohim and greatly devastated it, and how greatly advanced I was in Judaism, superior to most of my countrymen." Hey, Randy, it's good to see you. "Who are also my kin, and in particular how zealous I was with respect to the teaching of my fathers. But when Elohim willed it, he who sent me apart from the womb and from my mother called me to his grace in order to reveal the manifestation of his Son that I preach to the nations. I did not explain this to any living person." So in verse 16, reveal and explain, respectively, may be a play on words for galut or galash, or denegla or galit. We'll see some in the next slide here. And then be'ami, you can see these words here. Remember we talked about the tav. So what is that word? This one here? The negla. And then what is this one?
Galit.
Galut.
Galit.
And what is this one? Be'ami. Right? Or be'ama. Be'ama. How do you say people in Hebrew? Right? We are segula. The Aramaic word negla can also mean manifest and revealing through a visual process. It's a common play on word that Paul uses, emphasizing that the Messiah was revealed through his manifestation in the flesh. And manifestation is also one of the many meanings of milta, which is translated as word in John 1:1. The other word play is between the root Gala and Galilee, where Messiah was revealed or manifested in the flesh. Everybody good? Everybody good? So, nor did I even go to Jerusalem to the apostles who were there before me, but instead I went to Arabia, then turned to Damascus. And then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to see Peter and stayed there for 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles except for Yaakov, the brother of our master. And this is, of course, one of the kid challenge questions, that he had gone to Jerusalem. Nor did I even go to Jerusalem. The apostles were there before me, but instead I went to Arabia. Okay, we just read that. Oh, some key points here. Yep. So Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Presumably Paul went there for further revelation to get in touch with the pure words of Adonai, maybe. Eliyahu HaNavi spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai. Of course, somebody else spent a whole bunch of time up on Mount Sinai, right? Moshe Rabbeinu. What's that, buddy? Oh, they had a meeting in there today. They're probably good, but that's your mama. Yeah. Enjoy. You're the one who has to deal with them all night. Eat that sugar. Yeah, right, I got you. So cool. Something cool about Jerusalem in the Aramaic Peshitta is spelled, as you see there, pronounced Orushalayim, which could be understood to mean light of peace. Paul met only with Kepha and Yaakov, the head of the Jerusalem assembly, and Paul did see Barnabas, and he argued with Hellenistic Jews. We read those in Acts 9:27 and 29. So these things that I write to you, behold, before Elohim I testify, I do not lie. I don't know why he had to make a point to say, look, man, I'm telling you the truth. I'm not lying here, but he did. So after these events, went to Syria and Cilicia, and was not known by the Messianic assemblies in Judea. But they had only heard this, that he who previously persecuted them is now preaching the faith he used to try to cast down before. And they turned their praise to Elohim on my account. Paul's hometown of Tarsus is in southeast Cilicia. These things that I write to you, we already talked about that, right? I was not known. Yep. So Paul was not known literally by face by the assembly of Jews. Right there, the assemblies are in Judea and that are in Messiah, but he was known by reputation. So I guess if you go around persecuting people, we talked about this back when we were studying Acts. Your reputation kind of precedes you, and I think that's kind of what happened here. So, well, it wouldn't, and maybe that's why he had to say, "Look, I'm not lying to you," because who's going to trust him? Like, yeah, we know about you, dude. What's happening here? Now it's said to them about you, you're teaching all the Judeans who are with the Gentiles should break away from Moses, saying they should not circumcise their children and they should not walk in the customs of the Torah. So, as a kind of a review of chapter 1, Paul provides his credentials as a sent one, shliach, who was not appointed by any earthly body but by Elohim the Father and Yeshua the Son, and he is stunned that the believers in Galatia have become enamored with another gospel which is not good news at all. Any questions before we move on to something else?
Kind of a comment. I'm not sure. In some discussions over the years with Christians, I've come on some who believed that the gospel that Paul taught was the correct gospel, but that the gospel that James and others had taught was not the correct gospel. And that there literally were two gospels, but Paul's was right, or Paul's was, as you mentioned earlier, the gospel for the non-Jews. That in fact, essentially that Paul's gospel was not the same gospel as taught in the Gospels. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah, and that if you read something that seems from Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John that seems to contradict something that Paul said, believe what Paul said. The other thing is wrong. I've heard that.
Well, why? Okay, that doesn't even make any sense because they saw firsthand what Jesus did. Because even to make the case that you believe Paul over Matthew, Mark, Luke, like they saw Jesus when he was walking the planet. Like, why would you believe Paul? Not to say his divine encounter wasn't awesome and wonderful, but like he didn't see Jesus walking the earth. Like, why would that even make sense?
I believe it's part of a doctrinal view called Pauline Dispensationalism.
Oh, yeah.
Like Paul's
I have heard. I remember that term now. You got anything on this, Randy?
Yeah, exactly.
I got you.
I think it's because it's difficult to understand. I think that's
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, very good.
What I'm thinking is it kind of makes sense in a way. I'm not too smart.
Sure. Big Jim, good to go.
You know, there's one point I would make, that when you take the individual words apart and you go back to the Tanakh, and look at their definition there, and bring it back to the New Testament, then you understand what he's talking about.
Sure.
I think that a lot of people have not yet developed that
Sure.
ability to look and compare the language and understand it for themselves. And when they get to that point, it's coming, I think there's going to be a lot more revelation and understanding.
Absolutely. All right, so chapter 2. Let's talk about chapter 2. So here's some entry from the Peshitta. Then after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas and Titus, who was also with me. I went up because I was in Revelation, and I made known to them the gospel that I preached among the nations. I then explained to those who were considered to be something great among themselves, lest I labored in vain or should labor. I got. You want to talk about this slide just a little bit?
Well, it's interesting kind of play on words in a sense that even though this was written before John's Revelation, Gileana, the word used there, is the same word that is the title of the book of Revelation in Aramaic. So that Revelation is that word there. Hebrew, of course, if you read it, if you looking at Revelation, as far as I know, there's no Hebrew text of Revelation. But the title for it in Hebrew is Hitgalut.
Hitgalut, yep.
Yeah, which related to that same word.
Gileana.
Yeah, Gileana, Galut, same thing.
Gileana Vagalit. Yep. Concerning Titus, who was with me, we're going to talk about the intention of enslaving us. So the key point about that is the Halakha of Jerusalem Council, Beit Din, was not to compel circumcision. Right? So that's important. The Halakha of the Jerusalem Council, Beit Din, was not to compel circumcision. It ruled on the minimal requirements for those returning to Adonai to have fellowship with their Jewish brethren in order to hear Moshe taught in the synagogue every Shabbat. Right, exactly. And so when new believers are ready to be circumcised, it will be voluntary, not compelled. Right? So the enslaving there, the perfect Torah gives us liberty from that. So anybody got anything else about that?
I was just asking Diana if you knew that this Titus was the same Titus that the book of the Bible was written about.
I think so.
Written, yeah. At least not compelled before entering maturity and full understanding of what his own return meant. As seen later, a part of the Galatian heresy was circumcising people who didn't even believe or who had not grown in any understanding. The proper order of things would be first to trust in Yeshua and then seal that growth and faith with circumcision, rather than man use circumcision as an entry point into the community, as did the Jerusalem group and the Qumran community at the Dead Sea. This, of course, comes from the commentary from the Restoration Scriptures, or the True Name edition there.
It seems to me that within in the first century, the first step to be part of the community was mikveh, or immersion, versus circumcision. As you're considered part of the community after you've undergone Tevilah.
But
It's by faith, but you're doing it by faith. It's never compelled.
Yeah. Well, make no mistake now, for they want you to be circumcised immediately before you do anything else. So, matter of fact, we've got a friend who used to be part of this congregation, and he went and became a Chabadnik, right? And when he told us what happened, that was the first thing. I was like, all right, let's go get this done. Of course, he had already been, so it was Hataf Adam Barit. They had to draw a little bit of blood, because his circumcision wasn't a bris, so to speak, as they would say in New York, wherever he was. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but that was the first thing he had to do. He's by the way, this guy we're talking about, his name is his former name was Justin. He's a fantastic bass player. In case anybody cares. In case you want to start a band, go to Chicago and seek him out. He's a good bass player. The good news was the proclamation of freedom from slavery and from religion to the exiles of Galut Yah. Which here's, remember we talked about this a little bit before. Here it is right now, right? Galut Yah. These certain brothers from Jerusalem were coming quietly under the radar, reversing the truth of Scripture by using circumcision in a wrong chronological manner and by man-made standards as requirements for community entry and favor in the community. This is known as works of the law and works of man's law. What do you think about that? Before you got here, Randy, we talked about, see that word there, galut, Yah? Well, the word galut means exiles, and so lots of, we talked about this for, I guess, a good 10 minutes, maybe. Lots of people have opined that the word Galatia is galut, Yah, which means exiles of God, but it doesn't. It does not mean that. It would be cool if it did, but it doesn't. So what is a valid proselyte? So let's turn to some oral tradition, right? Said Rabbi Yochanan, a person is not deemed a proselyte until he is circumcised and immersed. And if he is not immersed, he remains a Gentile. That's what we were just saying. First be immersed, right? Our rabbis have taught on Tanite authority. A proselyte who is circumcised but did not immersed. Rabbi Eliezer says, lo, this one is a valid proselyte. For we find in the case of our fathers that they circumcised themselves but did not immerse. If he immersed but did not circumcise, Rabbi Yehoshua says, lo, this one is a proper proselyte. For we find in the case of our mothers that they immersed but did not circumcise. And the sages say, if he immersed but did not circumcise, circumcised but did not immerse, he is no proselyte, until he both circumcises himself and immerses. And so the point here is that Nazarene first century halakha seems to correspond with Rabbi Yehoshua saying he is a proper proselyte if he hasn't completed both. Because what's the point of it, right? Because we need to learn, yeah, absolutely, we need to learn the Torah and need to know what to do, right? Yeah.
My always thought it was more, I mean, I understand, the case for adult circumcision, but I always saw child circumcision as the parents are to teach their children the right way.
Right.
I promised to God I'm going to honor him by raising this child in the proper fashion. My heart that I'm circumcising and not his. I mean, it's his flesh, it's my heart.
So, yeah. I got a good friend of mine I was in the Marine Corps with. This doesn't have anything to do with it. It's so funny. He by some thing in his mom and dad's mind, to be like Abraham, they waited till he was 13.
Oh my God.
Well, that's Islam.
Yeah. It could be, but he said it was something to do with Abraham. He says, I don't even know. He doesn't even believe it. But he was 13 when anyway.
Jeff remembers that, then, doesn't he?
Yeah, he remembers it. He told me he remembers it. Rather, on the contrary, for they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was entrusted to me. Remember now, Paul says he's going to the Gentiles, right? Called the uncircumcision. Just as they entrusted Peter the gospel for the circumcised. And here's where we start to see the separation. Now, they could possibly make the wrong case here, saying there's a gospel for the Gentiles and there's a gospel for the non-Gentiles. Or there's gospel for the Jews and then the one for the non-Jews, right? I like yo-yos too. I would be doing that. And when they saw, they knew that grace was given to me, Yaakov, Peter, and Yochanan, who were all considered to be pillars, gave to Barnabas and myself the right hand of fellowship, that we be among the Gentiles and that they be among the circumcised. They only asked us to remember the poor, and this is my concern also, that I have labored on. So uncircumcision, literally foreskins or lauta, the same root word in the Targums that you find in Bereshit 17:11, 14, 23, 25. Archebustia in the Greek, and it appears the same passages in the Septuagint as in the Targums. And Galatians 2, this is a review. Anybody want to talk about something? But Paul supports the line of reasoning of the Jerusalem Council that argued that Peter Pharisaied himself by separating from those coming to faith outside of Judah, argues that there is a Jewish nature and that it is not sinful like the Gentiles, and no one will be justified by works of the Torah. Anybody want to talk about anything in chapter 2? We got some cool stuff getting ready to happen now. Let's talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, I'm going to ask Wayne. Talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls for a minute. This is really cool.
Well, one of the interesting things in terms of the two largest views that I've seen, at least in Messianic circles, about who Paul is talking about. One is that it's what would be those coming from Judea, the same group as in Acts 15. The other idea is that they may be missionaries coming from Qumran. See, there's some relationship to a scroll that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Cave 4. Title is Miksat Maaseh HaTorah, usually abbreviated as 4QMNT. Miksat Maaseh HaTorah, and it means the choice works of the Torah. Some translations say some works, but Miksat is often means end, and so in some contexts to be like choice or most important or important works of the Torah. And the overview of this particular scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that it is essentially describing ritual purity requirements and essentially criticizing the Pharisees' laxity in ritual purity.
They weren't enough.
Yeah, nowhere near what they were. Los Esenios, if you happen to be Mexican.
And the phrase, Ma'aseh HaTorah, works of the law or works of the Torah, that phrase doesn't appear in any writings we see in any rabbinic writings from that time. You don't see it, for example, in rabbinic literature. It is in this particular scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And in Galatians.
And in Galatians.
That's it.
But it's not in rabbinic writings. Ma'aseh HaTorah.
So they don't say works of the law.
I've not found it in any rabbinic writing. Maybe some later ones, but not
First and second century.
First, second century.
Is it then a messianic phrase that they use to distinguish between keeping the Torah as is written in the Torah and then the Pharisaic law? Do you think that's a thing they invented to distinguish between the two?
I don't know. It just seems, but in at least in modern times, oral Torah is Torah.
Sure.
And so there's not really that distinction being talked about in that sense.
Right. So in modern Orthodox Judaism, the Torah is just the Torah.
Oral Torah is Torah.
Right.
Essentially.
It carries the same weight.
Well, what I'm asking is, do you think the Christians at the time invented this phrase to distinguish between?
No, because it predates. I think that the Dead Sea Scroll predates Paul's writing.
Oh, okay. All right, I get you now.
And so that's the idea of possible missionaries from Qumran, Essenes, essentially, in Galatia.
And we'll see what it means here in a couple minutes, according to the Essenes.
Yeah, so I mentioned it's ritual purity, and that's what we'll talk about here in a couple slides. But it is a scroll that's not complete at Qumran. The 4Q means K4 of Qumran, and there's a number of scrolls that we see it in. There's 6 scrolls that are pieces and parts of this a 4QMNT. Mix up my stance. I mean, this is a phrase near the end of the scroll. It's not. There's no title that says this is the title of it, but so it's just called that because it's basically what it seems to be about. Now, none of them are complete. They all have holes in it. Lacunae, holes, Latin for holes in or gaps. Worms, cave worms. That's one of the things. But that phrase, Miksat Mahase HaTorah, it doesn't stop there, and that's not the only thing that connects it to Galatians, I think. Because a few sentences later, I guess, look at it, it'd be like, if you're looking at it in a modern context, like 4 verses later, you also have this particular phrase, which would be, V'nikshava lecha l'tzedekah, or translated in English, something like, and it shall be accounted to you as righteousness. So what is being counted as righteousness? Well, it's those laws they're talking about. So let me back up. It'd be the same phrase, a very similar phrase, is a Torah phrase, counted to you as righteousness, right? From Genesis chapter 15. So this is, just for context, this is the last couple verses of the scroll in English. Anywhere there's dots and things in there, that's where there's some gaps in the text. Their sins, remember David, one of the pious, he too was freed from his afflictions and was forgiven. And also we have written to you, and there's a gap, some of the choice words of the Torah. No, I'm sorry, there's not a gap. That's word 113. Some choice words of the Torah we think, or reckoned, I would say, are good for you and for your people, for in you. Or for in you, and then there's a gap. And then intellect and knowledge of the Torah, reflect on these matters and seek from him so that he may support. Continuing, your counsel, and keep far from you the evil scheming and counsel of Belial, so that at the end of time you may rejoice, finding that some of our words are true, and it shall be reckoned to you as righteousness. You do what is upright and good before him for your good and that of Israel. So, what is being reckoned for you as righteousness? What they've explained earlier, this is the end of the thing, Miksat Mahase HaTorah, some choice works of the Torah. And what are some of those choice works? Well, 4QMMT describes 24 specific areas of purity that the Pharisees are lacking in Jerusalem, and they would argue that it's defiling Jerusalem and defiling the temple by their lack of purity. And it's pure. The scroll starts with a discussion of purity of grains and purity of liquids, and not letting Gentiles touch things that are pure, which kind of tracks into what Peter is being criticized for in this, for avoiding essentially when these guys show up, he avoids commingling with Gentiles, which would be very much a purity kind of thing. So that tracks to me that this may well be what's going on here. So the kind of almost a summary here, but not quite. The purity halakha that set the Qumrani community apart from the Pharisees in Jerusalem is what this particular scroll is about. And in my view, kind of a summary, adhering to the Essene halakhic distinctions, these 24 areas of purity, that reckons the doer of these instructions for righteousness, is what separates the Essenes from the Pharisees, as them seeing themselves as being counted as righteous. And you do those 24 things, then you are counted as righteous. And so Paul is fond of quoting from Genesis 15:6, which seems to me to be directly opposed to what the teaching is of 4QMMT. So to compare this is 4QMMT, so the choice works of the Torah reckoned for good to you, reckoned to you as righteousness. Well, you look in the actual Torah, and he says he trusted in Yahweh, and he will reckon it to him as righteousness. So here's the connection. Those are pretty much comparisons. And I mean, what is reckoned, in this sense, what is reckoned to Abraham? What is it that was reckoned because of
His faith, his belief.
trust and his faith, right? That's the word,
Mhm.
yeah. And so it's the difference between, if you will, the doing these things to be reckoned to you as righteousness and what the Torah says. And as Paul is fond of quoting out, fond of quoting and pointing out, is that Bereshit 15 falls before Bereshit 17, which is faith here as opposed to the circumcision of chapter 17. So, here's a question. Messiah says that your righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees, or you'll not enter the kingdom of heaven. That's from Matthew chapter 5. So how do you think Yeshua HaMashiach is reckoning that righteousness, the righteousness he's talking about in Matthew chapter 5?
Just like you said, it's faith, not works.
Yeah, I'm saying it's going back to what Abraham, Yeshua is repackaging what is already written in terms of righteousness, what that's talking about. So it says this: if your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees and the scribes, it sounds like their righteousness is not based on trust. But that also parallels with the righteousness that the Essenes were trying. If this is right in terms of who was the opponents of Paul, if the Essenes were pushing their particular type of almost asceticism kind of righteousness, but ritual purity as that, it would be against both ideas, because faith is what's going on. Neither ritual purity practices of the Pharisees nor the ritual purity practices of the Essenes will reckon to you as righteous, in the sense that you can do certain things that are good, but it's not going to count for you for righteousness' sake.
It's both anything you can do, stuff you can do to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
Not.
This is not really the right. It's too deep of or too wide there, not deep necessarily, but something for study is it's not, I would say that it's modern, but it's beyond modern. Probably it's ancient, but it's the idea called zekut, which is the Hebrew word that means credit, or I guess you're given credit or given funding in that sense, but not credit and funding, but on behalf of doing this deed, you get credit for something. It's the idea of zakut is kind of based on, or I think it's kind of similar to what's going on in Galatians, in the sense that the idea of zakut is essentially that if you do a good deed, you get the benefit of all the good deeds that are like it. Like, for example, the idea of writing a letter of the Torah is essential equivalent to writing a Torah scroll.
Right.
And so you get the benefit, so to speak, or the righteousness from doing a whole Torah scroll.
Right.
But I think that's, again, kind of a righteousness that's saying, by doing these things, you get the righteous benefits from it. And if there's extra righteousness to go around from your benefiting, your children can also benefit from you doing that scroll. I mean, there is some truth in the sense that, your blessing will bless, you can bless your children. And we can see how Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that line of blessing, so to speak, can still come through. But I think it can be carried to a point of really misunderstanding what the idea of doing things in the name of your or because your ancestor did them, versus getting the benefit of necessarily their righteousness, for example. And it's kind of a complex subject, so maybe it is deep, but it also is something that probably takes a long time to probably dig to the bottom of it. So, and it's just kind of for future study, if you want to look up the word zakut, kind of read about that. Z-E-K-U-T, if that's what you translate it. I think that is the last slide I have.
I think so. So, who has questions? That's about all we have for tonight. Hope we come back next week. We start chapter 4, I think.
Yeah, 4 through 6, and then go back to Acts.
Go back
15.
to Acts 15, yeah.
I think you read 15 last week too, but I think it's
A rehash, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, if there are no questions, anything anyone wants to discuss from what we read today? Anything came up? Havdalah time.